need to go back and re-listen to me read it. So abolitionists fight for freedom. Virginia was the first colony in North America to kidnap people from West Africa, forcing them into slavery. The first Atlantic crossing to North America with the captured African people happened in 1619. In a circle that year. The fight to end the dreadful practice of buying and enslaving human beings began as soon as it started. Enslaved people themselves were the most outspoken opponents of slavery. Abolitionists have been around since slavery's beginning. So I'm going to pause and circle that. An abolitionist. In the margin, I'm going to write a person against slavery. A person against slavery. So these are the people who are fighting to end slavery. Abolitionists have been around since slavery's beginning. Congress had passed the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, going to underline that, which made helping people to escape slavery a crime. However, so I'm going to keep underlining that, made people escape slavery a crime. However, abolitionists were not intimidated. They felt like they had a cause for the good of the nation and for humanity. The Slave Act demanded that all escaped slaves be returned to their slave owners. Whites who helped or hid those who escaped were subject to harsh punishment under the law. The Quakers were the first organized group to help fugitives. This circle, Quakers, first organized group to help fugitives. By the late 1700s, Quakers became known for their efforts to help enslaved people find freedom. In North Carolina, they began organizing routes for slaves to travel north. Slavery was outlawed in many northern states after the Revolutionary War. I'm going to go back to the word Quakers. Quakers, you don't have to write this down, but they're a lot of the time they were found in Pennsylvania, and they are a group of passive people, pacifists. They don't believe in conflict. They believe in that you can solve things peacefully. And so you might think of your Quaker oats, the oatmeal that you might eat in the morning. They have an example of a Quaker on the front. The guy on the front of it is one of the early Quakers. Abolitionists believed that slavery was evil. Many were once believers in a steady, slow end to slavery. However, by the early 1800s, abolitionists were ready to act. In 1830, they began to demonstrate their beliefs. Various religious groups acted against the slave trade. During the 40 years from 1830 to 1870, abolitionists supported immediate emancipation to free the slaves. Emancipation, underline that, means free the slaves. That is what that means. Emancipation to free the slaves. William Lloyd Garrison co-founded the American Anti-Slavery Society, AASS, in the 1830s. The AASS sought to persuade Southerners and Northerners. The group stressed the inhumane nature of slavery. Garrison was a leading early abolitionist and publisher. In 1831, he started a newspaper called The Liberator. His readership included free and escaped American African Americans. Frederick Douglass was one of those people. Garrison became Douglass's mentor for a time. They worked together until Frederick Douglass started his own newspaper, the North Star, in 1847. North Star, 1847. Free and escaped African Americans shaped the abolitionist movement. During this time, the Underground Railroad offered a way to freedom. Formerly enslaved people actively coordinated escape plans, assisting enslaved people as they made their way from the South to the North to find freedom. Enslaved people often rebelled. As the abolitionist cause picked up speed, so did slave uprisings. Those who wanted slavery to continue also became more vocal. The slave owners had the law on their side. However, it did not stop abolitionist efforts. Southern plantation owners who owned slaves felt their livelihood was threatened by the abolitionists. Slave owners made a lot of money by stealing the work of the people they enslaved. So basically, they would not be able to operate their plantations, their farms, without the people they had, the slaves that they had to do all of the manual labor. So that's what they mean by stealing the work of the people they enslaved. Northern factory workers opposed abolition too. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm tripping on my words. Greed, hatred, and racism drove slavery. However, most in the North wanted slavery to end. In 1858, abolitionists were encouraged by the actions of John Brown. Brown was a militant white abolitionist. He believed that violent attacks on slave owners and those who supported slavery were necessary ways to end slavery. Brown, with his help of his sons and many revolting enslaved people, armed themselves and planned an attack in Virginia. Brown's famous raid on Harper's Ferry signaled to many Southern slaveholders that the upheaval and fight for freedom would continue. As feared by many slave owners, tensions between the North and South got worse. These pressures eventually led to the Civil War. Within 2 years, the two sides were at war over slavery. So you can compare John Brown to the Quakers in that they are complete opposites. The Quakers believe in peaceful resolve to their problems, and John Brown believed that you needed to have violent conflict in order to get what you wanted. So if I kind of zoom out, we can see our three people that we've talked about so far. William Lloyd Garrison is the person who started the American Anti-Slavery Slavery Society, and he had a newspaper called The Liberator. He worked with Frederick Douglass, who was a freed slave, and helped him begin his newspaper, which was called the North Star. And then finally, this is John Brown, a militant, actually white man who believed in ending slavery as well. So we have our three people that we talked about on the front. We'll talk about them a little bit more on the inside. So if we go ahead and open our newspaper, we have a lot of information. We'll see if we're able to get through it all this afternoon. We might not be able to. So we have the abolition movement in Ohio. So let me go ahead. This is the top article. I'm up at the top paragraph on the left. We're going to go through and underline, obviously, some more information that we might need for various activities we're working on. So as a state where slavery was illegal, Ohio played a very important role in the abolitionist movement in the 1800s. In 1833, a group of abolitionists started the American Anti-Slavery Society. Their goal was to convince others across the United States that slavery was evil and immoral. So immoral, we can just underline that, just means wrong. Basically, the antonym of our word moral. In Ohio, abolitionists established the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society in Zanesville in 1835. It was based on the American Anti-Slavery Society. In just 1 year, by 1836, the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society had about 10,000 members. The Ohio members worked hard to end slavery in the United States. So if we can think back to the creation of our state, one of the rules when we were creating our state of Ohio was that we were not allowed to have slavery in our state. So they were not ending it in Ohio, but they were working to end it in other parts of the United States. In addition, they tried to get new laws made that would protect the rights of African Americans after they were freed. They sent people across Ohio to give lectures on why slavery should end. They wanted to convince other Ohioans to join their cause. They published anti-slavery newspapers. The papers printed cartoons, songs, and poems about how brutal slavery was. Ohio was a free state. Slavery was illegal in free states. Slavery was legal in slave states. Enslaved people who escaped here were not truly free because of the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. It allowed slave owners to recapture those escaping slavery, even if they had fled to a free state. So I'm going to underline that. Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 allowed slave owners to recapture those escaping slavery. Okay, so even if they had managed to get to Ohio, if their slave owner came up to Ohio and found them, they could bring them back to wherever they were. The law also made it a crime to help an enslaved person who had escaped. Abolitionists in Ohio and other states who disagreed with the Fugitive Slave Law helped build the Underground Railroad. Ooh, we're going to talk about this. This is not a physical railroad going underneath the ground, but something else. It was a network of people and homes across several states that provided shelter, food, and aid to escaped slaves as they journeyed to freedom in Canada. So there's actually a lot of really cool historical sites in Ohio that are marked as Underground Railroad sites of places where people were maybe hidden. In Springboro, there's one. People would just hide these escaped slaves in their houses to help them journey to their freedom in Canada. Pretty cool thing that people did. Ohio is probably the most important state in the Underground Railroad because it created more than 3,000 miles of different routes that escaping enslaved people could travel through. Many prominent abolitionists came from or lived in Ohio and were instrumental in helping to end slavery in the United States. The Quakers were one of the first groups who supported abolitionism. They believed slavery was a sin, meaning that it is wrong. Charles Osborne, a Quaker from Mount Pleasant, Ohio, published the very first anti-slavery newspaper, The Philanthropist. That's kind of a hard word. In 1817. John Rankin, I'm going up to the top, Presbyterian minister in Ripley, Ohio, was an important conductor of the Underground Railroad who sheltered runaways in his home. Rankin is said to have lit a lantern in his front window to guide fugitives safely across the Ohio River. He is credited with helping more than 2,000 enslaved people. Harriet Beecher Stowe was another Ohio abolitionist and a friend of John Rankin's. She was so inspired by Rankin and his work to help enslaved people that she based parts of her book on him. Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin to educate readers about the awfulness of slavery. She hoped her book would inspire more people to change their views about slavery, and it did. Her book sold more than 500,000 copies in the first 5 years after it was published. It sparked much debate in a divided country a few years before the Civil War. Ohio is home to many more famous abolitionists, such as Levi Coffin. He was very active in the Underground Railroad and helped thousands of enslaved people escape to Canada. He was nicknamed the President of the Underground Railroad. Coffin also founded an African American orphanage in Cincinnati, Ohio, and assisted African Americans in starting their own businesses. John Parker ferried enslaved people across the Ohio River in his boat. In 1850, Benjamin Lundy from St. Clairsville, Ohio, started the first anti-slavery society west of the Appalachian Mountains called the Union Humane Society, and published The Genius of Universal Emancipation, an anti-slavery newspaper. In 1836, James Birney also published a second newspaper called The Philanthropist, which called for an immediate end to slavery and demanded equal rights for all African Americans. Oberlin College was opened in 1833 and established and run by abolitionists like John L. Shippard and Asa Mahan. Both men insisted that the college allow African Americans and women to enroll. So right now I've named a bunch of people who did their work in helping not freed slaves, but escaped slaves make their way across Ohio and into Canada. Several abolitionist politicians came from Ohio. James Mitchell Ashley was an Underground Railroad activist in Toledo who was elected to the House of Representatives in 1858. Ashley was one of the first politicians to call for a law to end slavery for good. His idea was the basis for the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which officially ended slavery in the United States in 1865. That's a really important sentence at the end. 13th Amendment to the Constitution officially ended slavery in the United States in 1865. So the amendments are things added later on to the Constitution that while we follow the Constitution, these are rules that have been slightly changed in it. Salmon Chase joined the abolitionist movement in 1830s. Chase was first a lawyer who defended John Birney in court for helping an enslaved person escape. Chase defended many enslaved people as well. He believed that African Americans should be free and have the same civil rights as white people. In 1860, Chase became President Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of the Treasury. Lincoln later appointed Chase to the U.S. Supreme Court. As a Chief Justice, Chase picked John Rock, an African American attorney, to argue a case in front of the Supreme Court. Rock was the first African American to do so. Ohio played a key role in the national abolitionist movement, the Underground Railroad, and the fight to end slavery. Ohio was a vital state in shaping what America is today. Sorry, I'm just trying to allow somebody to join. Oops, our meeting. Okay, so here there's pictures that are attached for our viewing. These are all the people that they discussed. Number one is Levi Coffin. Number two is Oberlin College. That's actually right outside of Columbus is Oberlin. Or is that in Cleveland? I can't remember. It's either Cleveland or Columbus. And then Benjamin Lundy is number 3. This is that little picture. James Birney is number 4. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the person who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Number 6, John Rock, who is the African American lawyer. And then number 7, is James Mitchell Ashley. And number 8 is Salmon Chase. So all some very important people. Sorry, I'm going to check the chat really quick. Somebody is chatting. Do we have any questions so far about what we've read? They don't really. Sorry, guys. It's really hard to check the chat when I have the thing up. Okay. Charlotte, do you have a question?
My question is, so I don't really get it because after the Civil War,
So this is, Charlotte, this is all before the Civil War.
Before?
Yeah, this is all taking place before. So we haven't talked about the Civil War yet. We talked about the American Revolution. We talked about the War of 1812. Civil War after this.
Yeah, but Frederick Douglass. And then there's other, and then Harriet, and there's other Black people on this story, but like my question really is, it's kind of hard to explain though, but like is like, so Frederick Douglass was like a president, kind of?
No. He wasn't a president. He was a formerly enslaved person who became who fought his way for freedom and started a newspaper. We'll talk about them more at the bottom. Harriet Tubman is another key person in helping people make their way to through the Underground Railroad, and as Sojourner Truth. Let's go ahead and talk about those people at the bottom, and I'll see if you still have the same question, okay? All right. So let's look at the bottom. We're looking at celebrated abolitionists of the 1800s. Okay, so we have Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was born in Maryland on a plantation in 1818. As a child, he was sold away from his mother at the age of 7. He never knew his father. Douglass taught himself to read and write. This was a big accomplishment since enslaved children were not allowed to go to school. Later, Frederick taught other enslaved people. He fought back when attacked by handlers. At the age of 20, Douglass planned his escape. He dressed like a sailor and boarded a northbound train. When he arrived in New York, his mission appeared to be a success. In New York, Douglass got a job as a laborer. He attended abolitionist meetings and got a job with the Anti-Slavery Society in Massachusetts. He was invited to speak about the abolitionist movement throughout the North and Midwest. He opened his home to people escaping slavery. He hid 400 fugitives on their way to Canada. Because of the Fugitive Slave Acts, slaves often fled to Canada. Once there, extradition was not a threat. At one point, even Frederick Douglass moved to Europe to avoid capture. So extradition is just a word meaning that they can take you from where you are and bring you back to basically serve time for your crime, or like in this case, be returned to their slave owner. His book, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, was the first that he published. He penned it 7 years after his escape. Later, he wrote 2 other books. Mr. Douglass became an important American leader, an orator. An orator is somebody who speaks, like kind of like gives speeches. An orator gives speeches. I'm spelling speeches wrong. Speeches. That seems wrong. Speeches. Orator, you can hear the word oral, meaning using your mouth. Orator, fighting for radical justice, or racial justice, I should say. Although Frederick Douglass died in 1895. His good deeds live on in the monuments built in his honor. Next person. Harriet Tubman, another famous abolitionist, was Araminta Ross, later known as Harriet Tubman. She adopted the name at the age of 13. Tubman was also enslaved on a Maryland plantation, born in 1820, one of 11 children living in a single room cabin. So imagine you have a single room, you're all in your living room, and everybody is sharing one room. She was put to work at the age of 6. Beaten by her owner and fed table scraps, life was hard. She got a serious head injury at the hands of a slave owner, from which she suffered for life with blackouts and dizzy spells. Escaping in 1849 to Pennsylvania, Tubman found freedom through the Underground Railroad. Her freedom would soon be threatened with the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. That meant any escapees living in the North could be captured and returned to slavery. The only way to overcome that law was for enslaved people to escape farther north into Canada. Harriet Tubman assisted in that effort and became a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Her assistance was legendary. She even got the nickname Moses, like the biblical prophet who guided his followers to freedom. Leading 300 enslaved people to freedom, Tubman conducted a total of 19 escape trips. Each journey meant she was putting her life on the line. However, she never got caught, and there was no loss of life. Years later, she would earn the titles of civil rights activist and nurse. And finally, we have our last person that you might not be as familiar with, Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth also began life in slavery. She was born under the name Isabella Baumfree in New York on a Dutch farm in 1797. Isabella spoke only Dutch early on. When she was sold to an Englishman, he would beat her because she didn't understand English and could not follow orders. Later, listening to others, she taught herself English. In 1825, Baumfree's owner told her he would set her free. He reneged or went back on his promise, so she escaped. So he told her she could leave, and then he said, "Oh, no, I changed my mind." So she decided to escape. She stayed with neighbors who considered slavery evil. They bought her from the Englishman and then gave her freedom. Soon after, in 1827, slavery in New York was outlawed. Once free, Isabella started working with abolitionists. She wanted freedom for her people everywhere in America. In 1843, she changed her name to Sojourner Truth, which meant truth traveler. She felt her name expressed her calling. It described her purpose to travel around the country spreading what she believed to be God's word while denouncing slavery. Sojourner Truth was a thought-provoking speaker. She spoke about inequality and forged or shaped, a different word for forged, an important path toward justice. She also fought for the rights of women. In 1851, Sojourner Truth spoke at Ohio's Women's Rights Convention and gave the moving and now famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" So we have our 3 people here at the bottom: Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth. All vital people in this movement of the Underground Railroad, all escaped slaves. So very interesting people. Tomorrow, what you're going to be working on is our crossword. I will ask you to do it on here because I really need you to remember that a crossword is not a multi-answer response unless you are fitting it all in the same box. It's not even a sentence. I literally want the word that you would have for 3 across. I literally want the word that you have for 2 down. So I'm going to read those, and then tomorrow you will work independently on these crossword questions. Your across questions are people who are against slavery and fought to stop it. Number 4, using power in a way that is fair, equal, and balanced for everyone. Having freedom taken away by force and compelled to obey commands and do work for no pay. That's number 6. And number 7 is when people are able to make their own choices. Down, someone who fights against slavery. 2, down, objective mission or movement that someone supports. And 5, down, a system where humans are owned by other people and stripped of their rights. So I went all over a little bit for my social studies Zoom, just a little bit. Tomorrow, like I said, you have your crossword that you're going to work on. Right now, my math friends, you need to take out simple solutions 53. 53, and you should have been able to start that earlier. So I'm going to share my screen. It's number 53 is what we're working on. And I am going to give us, let's say, 5 minutes until we start going over any. Let me make sure that there is one. No, I think we can try all of those. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Carter, you can go ahead and sign off.